In this video, we're going to practice working with contingency or two-way tables, both different terms for the same thing. This is a very common way to present information with two different variable types. So in this case, we've got a sample of home loan applications. Our first variable might be the loan type, so whether they're looking for an individual loan or a joint loan. And then up here we have information about the borrower, whether they rent their home, whether they have a mortgage, or whether they own their homes. And then the other thing that you'll notice is we have the row totals and the column totals here as well. This often makes a lot of our work easier when it comes to working with percentages, which is what we're going to do right now. So if I look at part A, we'll start there. It says, what percentage of these home loan applications were from people that rent? I like to start these problems actually thinking about the denominator. What's the whole group that I'm choosing from? So in this case, this says of these home loan applications, meaning of all of the applications that we're looking at. So out of the 10,000 applications that we have in our sample, how many of them were from people that rent? So I'm going to say, well, how many renters did we have? If I look at the the column total for that, we have 3,858. So this is how I would calculate that percentage. I'm just going to go ahead and divide that out, and I should end up with 0.3858, which is the decimal form of that percentage. If I want to convert that to a percentage, I can either multiply that by 100, or more simply, you can take that decimal place and move it to the right by 2 spots. So this would be 38.58%. So there's my first part, part A. Continuing on, if I look at part B right here, it says what percent of these home loan applications were for joint loans. Again, we're looking at the percent of these home loan applications. So again, that means that I'm choosing from the total number in my sample, which is that 10,000. So out of the 10,000 total loans that I have within my sample, how many of them were for joint loans? So I'm going to look at the total number of joint loans, which if I look all the way over here, the total number of joint loans should be 1,495. So I have 1,495 divided by 10,000. And again, I can divide that out. 1,495 divided by 10,000 should just be 0.1495 or 14.95%. So there we go. Let's continue on. Part C says, what percent of these home loan applications were for joint loans and from people that rent? So again, I'm going to start by thinking about what's my whole, what's the group that I'm choosing from. So in this case, of these home loan applications, so of the 10,000 applications that I have. So that means that my denominator is going to be 10,000. So out of those 10,000 loan types that I have, how many of them were for joint loans and from people that rent? So now I have two conditions. I want both a joint loan and from people that rent. So joint and rent. So in this case, I'm not going to look at the total number of joint loans or the total number of renters. I'm going to look for how many people both rent and wanted a joint loan. So you can do this in one of two ways. The mathematical term for this would be the intersection of these two things, which here's my renters, here's the joint loans, and then the intersection would be, it's right here where those rows and columns intersect, 362. You can also think about it as, well, how many people both rented and wanted a joint loan? Again, 362. So I have 362 divided by 10,000. So if I divide that out, let's make sure I don't make a silly mistake. I should end up with 0.0362 or 3.62%. Cool. We are done with that question. Let's move on to part D. We got a couple more here to look at. Part D says, what percent of these home loan applications that are for joint loans are from people that rent. Now, this looks maybe at face value really similar to Part C. You might even think it's the same question, but it's not quite. And it's for that reason, the thing I said I like to start with, I like to start by thinking about what's the total group that I'm choosing from, what's the whole of my percentage. So in this case, it's the percent of these home loan applications. So it's not just that though, but it's those that are for joint loans. So I'm going to divide this by the total number of joint loans. So in my denominator, I'm going to look at, well, what's the total number of joint loans? So let's scroll back up and look at my data set. The total number of joint loans is 1,495. So that means I'm not going to be dividing by the total number of loans in my sample, which would be 10,000. I'm instead going to divide by just the total number of joint loans, so 1,495. So out of the 1,495, how many of them were from people that rent? Now, when we say we're only looking at the joint loans, that means that we're only looking at this row. To be honest, I don't care about anything else in this table for this particular question. I am only looking at that highlighted row for the joint loans. So from that row, how many of them were from people that rent? So of those that had joint loans, how many renters did we have? Well, we had, again, 362 of those individuals. So in this case, I would take 362 and divide it by 1,495. So the numerator is the same, but the group that I'm choosing from is a little bit different. So I'm going to take 362 out of 1,495. Let's round the decimal version to 4 places. So that would be 0.2421 or 24.21%. So what you're going to notice in these types of problems, and eventually when we start to talk about probability, is that changing the wording just ever so slightly can change the outcome of your problem. So you're going to have to read very, very carefully through these types of problems. Let's keep moving on to Part E. Part E says, what percent of joint home loan applications are from people that have a mortgage? So this time around, I've phrased it again just a little bit differently. I again want to start by thinking about what's my total, what percent of joint home loan applications. So I'm going to divide by the total number of joint home loan applications, which is actually the same number that we worked with last time, 1,495. So out of the 1,495 joint home loan applications, I want to know what percentage of them are from people that have a mortgage. So I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to say, well, again, I'm looking at only the joint row. I don't really care about anything else. But this time around, I want to look at the number of people that have a mortgage. So the number of people that have a mortgage that applied for a joint loan is 950. So I'm going to take 950 divided by 1,495. So 950 divided by 1,495 gives me 0.6355, that would round up, or 63.55%. We'll move on to our last question here. Again, in Part F, it says what percent of joint home loan applications. So I'm not even going to read the rest right now. I'm just going to say, well, I know I'm dividing by the total number of joint home loan applications, which is 1,495. So of those joint home loan applications, what percent are from people that own their home? So I need to know the number of people that own their home that applied for a joint home loan. So, okay, let's go ahead and scroll back up. Again, I'm only looking at this joint row right here. That's the only one that matters to me at this point in time. From that row, we have 183 individuals that own their home, so I'm going to take 183 divided by 1,495. So 183 divided by 1,495 gives me 0.1224 or 12.24%. So